Welcome back to Leaders, a podcast dedicated to exploring the best leaders this world has ever seen. Before diving into today's podcast, I wanted to again encourage you to listen, rate, and review this podcast on any of your preferred podcast players, as well as follows our channels that we've created. In addition, I just wanted to again revisit, why am I doing this podcast? And so the topic of leadership, there is a tremendous wealth of material on. No shortage of other podcasts, other articles and materials on the topic. But in my experience, there really isn't a great resource or a podcast or leadership series, videos, anything that goes into the depth on a scale of examining just simply the best leaders. Some will go into particular qualities of a good leader. Some will focus in on interviewing other leaders. But I feel that I can provide value to you by examining the best CEOs, the best executives, some of the best leaders in the business world, past and present, and taking the time every week or 2 weeks or so to really understand their leadership style, what made them successful, and then over time be able to connect the dots to see how this has traced throughout history, and really then provide back some tangible leadership lessons that you could apply to your daily life, not only professionally, but also personally. And so that's my mission here. And really for me, it is a topic that's widely known but deeply misunderstood. And this for me personally is a way to learn. I've always loved reading and learning and knowing new things. And the topics of business and leadership have always stuck in my head. And so this is a way for me to channel that into a deeply concentrated and focused efforts that will be multi-years long, that will provide a great resource for anyone who can listen back to this material. And I think the unique value prop as well is that as we study these leaders, is that this material does not expire. What I mean by that is that there's podcasts out there that are very timely and particularly either news-oriented or with the times. And if you listen to that podcast 5 years from now, it's not really going to provide you much meaningful value. And so I think the timeless material here of these leaders and these leadership qualities are going to stick, whether that be if we're in a world of, generative AI and futuristic things 10, 20, 30 years down the road. I think as humans, we are innately positioned to be leaders in the world, and I think studying these people is the best value that you can spend from a time position amongst anything else. So again, I feel deeply passionate about this topic and really want to put it out there that this material, as I refine it over time, is going to continue to grow, and I'm going to continue to cover as many leaders as I can imaginably cover. And so just wanted to put that out there, a little bit more detail around the why behind this podcast and why I am deeply passionate about this topic and want to share it wider. And so as we go into episode 5 now, so episode 5 is focused on John Chambers, and he's the former CEO of Cisco Systems. Really from a research standpoint here, I again kind of look first and foremost to the biographies and or books that are out there, if there is any. So that led me to 2 different books that I was able to get through very quickly and the first one being John Chambers and the Cisco Way. And so very framed similarly as the Jack Welch GE Way. Very valuable book that had a lot of insights into it. And then there was another one that John had co-written, and that was called Connecting the Dots, Lessons for Leadership in a Startup World. And so those two books, combined with a few interviews I found of John, as well as a few articles, are the research realm of this podcast. And so let's get into John Chambers. So John's rise to the CEO path at Cisco first started actually as a native Clevelander. He was born in Cleveland, and both of his parents were actually studying to be doctors at Case Western Reserve here. So a Cleveland connection, albeit very briefly, for John, as he then forayed into West Virginia thereafter and did his schooling there. After his school, he started in technology sales at IBM. And that's going to be a very foundational first job for him. And I'll go more into the experience and the lessons that he learned from that first position in sales at IBM from 1976 to 1983. He then took a position at Wang Labs from 1983 to 1990. Thereafter, he joined Cisco after they IPO'd in 1990 as a senior salesman, and then advanced to EVP 3 years in. So he was kind of then slotted in to be the number 2 man, eventually becoming CEO and being the number 2 man before that in 1995. And he served as CEO of Cisco until 2015. Similar to Welch, who we'll go into a little bit more in the Mentors and Heroes, and he has a few quotes that John references here as well. But John, within his leadership realm and CEO seat, had a great 20 years of business success, as Cisco's annual sales grew from $1.9 billion to $49.2 billion during that time. The market cap at one point reached $500 billion, which made it the most valuable enterprise, albeit a very short time on Earth, in March 2000. And John is pegged as kind of the quintessential information age CEO. And during his 20 years at Cisco, he was involved in the organization and then remained on the board until 2017. And so he was at Cisco during a lot of the formative times of technology advancement, and he was really at the forefront of that, as well as now that we get into the brief overview of that was kind of his general path into the rise of the CEO. And now we will get into a little bit of before the leadership section and the main successes he found from a business sense. Again, it is important to highlight the failures that he may have come across within his time. And as I kind of talk through this, it may make more sense in future podcasts to maybe put the failures after we frame it out a little bit more from a business success context, to come back to the failures with a little bit more context into that. But anyway, I feel like we will bucket the failures or perceived failures oftentimes of how these are viewed as 3 different things here. So within Cisco and within this technology time, a lot of what John was known for was being very high volume in terms of acquisitions. And so anytime you have a high volume of acquisitions, there are very few companies who can do high volumes of M&A, mergers and acquisitions, and be successful in all of those rights. And so part of the failures that are seen within some of them are his aggressive acquisition strategy, and some of those deals not panning out as planned. So, for example, Cisco acquired several companies in the consumer electronics space, such as Flip Video and Linksys, but ultimately failed to gain a foothold in that market. So, again, being aggressive and diversifying into other business lines sometimes doesn't work out and sometimes actually deviates from the successful business framework that he had stood up before. So, other than that, misjudging market trends as well in some areas. So, Cisco missed out on some major market trends during Chambers' tenure, such as the rise of cloud computing and the shift to software-defined networking. And the company was slow to adapt to these changes, and as a result, it lost market share to competitors. So as we will delve into more of the business successes, I think John made a great pivot for the business as Cisco started out as a router business, and then he evolved that over time to diversify into other business segments. But again, as some of these things and some of the market trends that were happening, they didn't necessarily capitalize on. So there was that as a foreseen failure as well. And then finally, a smaller one would be the internal culture issues that some may have experienced when at Cisco. So, despite his efforts to promote a culture of innovation and collaboration, there were reports of internal conflicts and a lack of accountability at Cisco during his tenure. In 2014, for example, the company had to lay off thousands of employees due to slow growth and internal inefficiencies. So there are a slew of larger layoffs that come with the big ebbs and flows of a high growth technology business. We see this a lot even in today's times of a lot of the larger tech companies that are being forced or kind of revisiting the idea of resizing their employee base. Cisco had to go through that actually multiple times, I think, under John's tenure. So the ebbs and flows and ups and downs of performance, particularly in a high-growth technology sector, is always going to be a challenge, I would say, in terms of keeping a great workforce and the numbers in terms of the employees as well. So a few failures there, but really wanted to really highlight that John was viewed as a visionary leader that emphasized collaboration, innovation, and a customer-centric approach. So we will go into more of the leadership style dissection, mantras, philosophies, and quotes that embodied what made John such a great leader for Cisco during his time. And so he was widely regarded as one of the most successful and effective CEOs of his time, having transformed Cisco when he got there from a small networking company into a global technology giant that is still a presence to this day. His leadership style briefly was kind of marked by a strong focus on building relationships and creating a culture of trust and openness. He believed in empowering his employees to take risks and make decisions, while also holding them accountable for their actions. He was also a big proponent of teamwork and collaboration, bringing together employees from different departments and backgrounds to work on projects. He was also known for his ability to anticipate and adapt to changing market conditions. So as we alluded to within the failures, there were some market trends that he failed to capitalize on, but there, particularly in this industry and in the course of 20 years, you aren't going to capitalize on every single market trend and market condition that's out there, but I think he holistically captured a great amount of that by being a strong believer in innovation and then encouraging his employees to constantly think outside the box and come up with new ideas. And he was aggressive from both an acquisition sense and then just a decision-making sense. So he typically, within these acquisitions as well as key decisions that he was making from the business, was very quick and very bold with some of the things that if he believed and had the confidence in, that he pressed go on very quickly. And that allowed them, I think, to capitalize on this time very well. And investing in emerging technologies. And really at the core of that was that if he believed that it was in the best interest of Cisco and his customers, he was simply going to do it. And so a Fortune profile quote to kind of encapsulate that would be, he's in overdrive all the time on a sales call that never ends. So as we compare him to maybe some of the other leaders that we've covered so far, he is naturally a salesman, and he has the experience of a salesman. And so him as a leader is kind of going to be at the forefront of how he's viewed and maybe some of the interactions that other people had with him. And so they describe him kind of as a natural pitchman. So he's able to really sell ideas. He's able to acquire companies. He's able to make decisions and convince people that this is the right decision to make. Things like that. He also learned what not to do from his time at IBM when he was a salesman, as they failed to capitalize on personal computer market. And he really, from that, also from a big organization sense, realized how bureaucracy and conformity could hinder a company in a rapidly changing marketplace. So that experience alone, I think, then prompted him to really change his behavior as a CEO to say, that's not going to happen in my businesses. And he is also quoted in saying that leadership is about taking risks when others won't. And the way that he did that was that he ran multiple playbooks. And so these are outlined both in a book, and then I also listened to a podcast that he had done a few years back with Reid Hoffman. And so there's 5 different playbooks that he kind of sets up, being a crisis playbook. So within, the tech industry and the economy within the early 2000s, he definitely went through a plan of crisis and how to really, from a financial crisis perspective too, he was able to set up Cisco so that it was not totally negatively impacted by the economic moves there. And so he set up a playbook from that standpoint. He also set up a agility and alignment playbook. So again, I reference the swiftness that he makes decisions in, and the alignment in which those acquisitions, which is actually another playbook here, an M&A kind of customer acquisition playbook. And then the final 2 here, ones that we've already kind of mentioned briefly that are going to be central to his business, are customer playbook and a culture playbook. And the way that John described Cisco and what really set them apart, what was their competitive advantage, was they had 4 key strengths. The first one being an ability to anticipate and get ahead of market transitions, the innovation processes that could be replicated at scale, a strong culture that was focused on customers, and fourth, a network architecture that gave us incredible flexibility to innovate and move into new markets. And so going into the customer playbook and the customer focus side of things, John describes that as customer success is our success. And the importance of a customer that he focused on, he really modeled after the customer care philosophy that he experienced at IBM. So again, he's going back to past experiences, seeing what worked and what didn't, and then implemented it at Cisco, or decided not to if it didn't work out. And so he really wanted to develop the most customer-centric company, of building lasting relationships and also being very reliant upon customer feedback and building what the customers wanted in terms of products for what Cisco put out. And so this is a little bit different, I would say, from Steve Jobs that we've studied in terms of Steve, I think, would have developed a lot of his products based on his kind of gut instinct and seeing what he saw in the marketplace versus asking a customer directly what they wanted, versus John as a salesman and in his position as CEO really relied on customer feedback as to dictate the products and development of those products that came over time. And John also spent sometimes 30 hours a week or up to 50% of his time really dealing with customers on a weekly basis, because he knew that that was going to be very important for their growth and wanted that to trickle down to employees to have that focus on customers as well. And so he was always looking for reality checks as well. And a lot of that focus of meeting with customers also, as he talks about how they weathered through the 2008 financial crisis, he kind of got some insights before the crash happened from his customers, and them kind of slowing down their business and seeing the warning signs. And so that was important for them to sustain as well. So he always has this customer focus. In his past experiences, both at IBM and Wang Labs, both of the companies that he experienced over time lost track of the customers. And I think, again, he made it his point to really focus in on that and tell himself that that part alone was not going to be the reason that he failed. And he really has the personal charisma, the natural optimism, and a strict focus on people. And he says that it's not about the technology, it's about the effect that it has on people and businesses. And so in 1996, from a business decision standpoint and structure, he divided Cisco into 150 products and 4,400 employees into 6 teams. And he really followed in the footsteps of Jack Welch as a fundamental tenet of leadership to not seek to compete unless he believed that that product or that segment was going to capture a number 1 or number 2 spot in the market. So modeled that off what he saw from Jack and GE and saw that as a good kind of rule of thumb to implement within the leadership sense. In 1999, they go into telecom. And again, diversifying products, I think it was a smart business decision to strike an agreement with Quest Communications to develop one of the largest IP-based networks in the country. And at the same time, he's also going to partner with Sprint and build a combined voice, video, and data network. And in this, he's diversifying just out of the router business and then building a larger vision of voice for what he calls the New World Network. Again, the idea of acquisitions in the playbook there, too, is going to be a big component of the growth that Cisco sees in this time as well. And so he saw acquisitions really as a company's growth structure and the tenet of company culture. And within acquisitions, he said that you're acquiring technology, but you're also acquiring the people. And so he was really diligent as well from an acquisition standpoint of really acquiring talent within there and then not just laying off or letting go of a bunch of people and acquiring the technology behind the business, as you may see with some other companies and their strategic reasons behind kind of stifling their competition or buying out their competition. He's really about the people that are behind some of the businesses that they've acquired and setting them up to succeed within the Cisco environment once they acquire them. And so he is seen as a sign of strength to acquire this technology quickly too. So again, it speaks to his nimbleness to understand that if the opportunity to acquire a company comes at a very important and essential time for a particular technology sector or a particular product, and he realizes that internally at Cisco, they do not have the resources, technology, or people currently within the business to capitalize on that moment, then he acted very quickly to acquire that company and really gobble up that kind of market and growth. And so part of the other culture playbook is that Cisco is renowned for having very good perks and modeling a lot of his company culture actually after HP. And he valued a centered management approach, teamwork, made shareholders profits, and a place where people wanted to do good work. He implemented things like stretch goals, which he thought were a kind of a traditional top-down structure for a company wasn't going to work. Instead, he tried to empower teams, and so stretch goals are part of an idea of really making people feel empowered to go beyond the limits of just simply meeting the goals, but going that further step. I talked about him being an EVP and the number 2 man, and he was kind of groomed under the previous CEO at Cisco that helped develop a lot of the great framework and infrastructure that you see there. And so a lot of that from a culture standpoint that he tried to implement too from his predecessor there was on the ideas of frugality. So not just spending to spend, which is a delicate balance, I would say, in terms of being frugal, but then also being aggressive from an M&A front. So he was able to sustainably grow the company to an extent. You know, you had the layoffs and you had a slowdown in the business, but over those 20 years, the company grew tremendously. So without saying that, that was a key component. He was also an evangelist of the new internet economy. And so this kind of salesman mentality was one that kind of looked at him as an industry spokesman that was confident of the future and vision and changed the way he kind of had a quote here in saying that he wanted to change the way we work, live, play, and learn. He also walked the talk, so he used the internet as a business medium much earlier than other ones did within their internal operations. So, you know, he's pegging himself as the internet is the new economy. We need to be on this. Well, the way to really embody that and manifest that is to stand that up internally and see how that is implemented and see how other companies can implement it. So he really pushed that within Cisco to build out a lot of their internal systems and technology through the internet, which was really smart in hindsight. And so he's quoted in saying that change is the only constant within the technology industry, and more on kind of what he was looking for, not only within him as a leader, but then also within the managers and people that he was hiring. And so the main thing that he said was the ability to develop a team was what he looked for in managers and leaders. And he's quoted in saying that collaboration allows us to know more than we are capable of knowing by ourselves. If you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. And so he was a visionary, a very positive person, and he foresaw within the role of the CEO specifically that he felt that there were 4 main roles of the CEO to round out this kind of leadership style section. And so those 4 roles were vision and strategy, so having one and then being able to communicate that, which along with one of the other roles is just strong communication. Another one would be to retain, recruit, and develop a management team. And then finally, what we just talked through was to develop a culture. And as we wrap up this section, John was quoted in, again, going back to Jack Welch and GE, in saying that Jack gave him the advice that in order for John to build Cisco from a good to great company, he had to have a near-death experience. And then John was kind of quoted in saying, the only way to deal with the future is to create it. And so finally, we will wrap up this podcast with our final section here, which is a shorter section on mentors and heroes. So John really points within the book to his second stint and career at Wang Labs. And the reason that he joined Wang Labs was mostly from the founder of Wang Labs, Dr. An Wang. And he felt that An was the smartest man that he ever met and one of the finest people he ever knew outside of his father. And he joined that firm, and it was a very successful earlier word processing business that dominated before An ended up dying towards the end of John's stint. John was forced thereafter, after leaders of the organization failed to really see the market change quickly enough, that John, at the end, really was then forced to lay off, I think, close to 5,000 people there. But he still felt that the development that he and the lessons he learned under An was tremendous. We had also mentioned a few times before someone we've covered here in episode 3 is Jack Welch. And so he viewed Jack as a mentor. He maintained a relationship with Jack. They served actually together on the President's Export Council under Clinton. And Welch praised Chambers as a visionary leader who had transformed Cisco into a global powerhouse. After Welch died in 2020, Chambers paid tribute to his former mentor, calling him a role model for all of us in business and a great man and leader. And then finally here, so John, he serves as CEO up until 2015. He's on the board through to 2017. He's still actually to this day very actively involved. He has his own venture firm. And what he's doing today is kind of, he's describing here in this final section as saying that you either reinvent yourself or you get left behind. That's true of individuals, states, and countries. There's no entitlement in this new world that the internet has enabled. He says he's on a constant learning cycle. Working with the startups is like playing 20 chess games that seem independent but actually overlap in interesting ways. That's how I constantly learn. You learn from others. You don't learn when you talk. And I think that's a great way to wrap up this and circle back to my kind of intro here of I'm on a mission to continually learn. I'm going to learn from others and study the best business leaders out there and communicate that into this podcast format. And so that's a great just key takeaway and a reinforcement of why I do this podcast. And so I hoped you enjoyed learning about John and his leadership style. He was a transformative leader through this technology cycle, and it seemed as though he, had some similarities within how he viewed business and how he got success with some of the other leaders that we have seen. And he had a strong emphasis on customers, What really set him apart, I feel like, is that kind of natural salesman and his agility and alignment to the business and the ability to serially acquire companies and fold them into the success of the business that really made him stand out, and something that I will take away from my studies within John Chambers. So that will wrap up episode 5. Hope to see you soon again on Leaders Podcast soon, studying the 6th leader in our podcast series. Thanks.